The Republican Party is continuing to undermine absolutely everything it is that human life needs to have meaning. Now, this new development is taking place in Arkansas, which is wouldn't surprise many people that this is where it's taking place. And these new policies that have been put through by the governor, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the daughter of Mike Huckabee, former U.S. presidential candidate, and a bunch of other things. Well, she signed into legislation, there's a new law that would drastically overhaul the entire education system. They essentially would just privatize it. She's instituted the now age-old school voucher program, the one that would give you choice of where to go to school, because that's really what they're all about. Now, seen here is Huckabee Sanders signing the new bill into law, surrounded by children that look worried that their future is going to be destroyed by the reform. Now, this legislation was passed through very quickly. Not a lot of people even got to see what was going on. From the day that it was tabled to the day that it was passed was only 16 days. And in terms of legislation, that's pretty damn fast, and was not really put up for any kind of public debate, even though it affected the state's, about 700,000 children, and would drastically alter the way that they receive education. And it was a 144-page bill, and it was pushed through that quickly. And the really weird thing is that it has the ability to bring in racial segregation. Now, of course, Huckabee Sanders defended the move, claiming that it was an improvement from the existing policy of not properly funding education. When they don't fund it properly, sabotage it and say, hey, look, we've got an alternate to this thing that didn't work because we made sure that it didn't work. Okay, so this really goes back into like a tweet that she made where she says, I'm not interested in being a caretaker of the failed status quo. I vowed to be a change maker for our people, she said about education right before she completely gutted it, removed human rights and science from the system. Right. Okay. Now, of course, since the Republican Party does have a supermajority inside of the state, it was passed with a 26-8 vote in the state Senate and a 78 to 21 in the House. The premise of this legislation is simple. It's just the school voucher program that has appeared in many other Republican-dominated states. Basically, they take whatever it is that they would have spent on education, if they actually spent money on education, and put it into a voucher. And you take that voucher and you take it to whatever school it is you want to, whatever school you want to send your kid to, or even if you want to homeschool them and make them completely anti-science. Okay, so they're taking the state money they would have spent on education, allowing you to take it to wherever you want, including a private school. Essentially taking the money out of a public school and putting it into a private school. So, essentially transferring public school funding into private schools. And then you could then take that money, take your own money on top of that and put it towards some kind of tuition like a private school. So essentially the state would be funding private schools, which would kind of be the opposite of what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to fund public education, not private education. State money isn't supposed to be given to capitalists. It's supposed to be spent on public welfare. Hence the whole point of it existing. Now, taking this route, public schools will essentially be gutted even further. They'll lose even more of their funding, and they'll be sabotaged down to the point where they're essentially functionally useless. And at that point, they would have their justification for getting rid of public education in general and have a way to privatize the entire system, setting the United States back more than a century. More than a century. Now, this has been seen and rightfully criticized as literally nothing more than a transfer of public school funding to private schools. And it's largely been criticizing as just taking a whole bunch of public money from public taxes and then giving it to the ruling class to spend as they want to spend, and giving it all to them under the guise of giving you choice. Because nothing says choice like poor people choosing the only thing that they can because they can't afford anything else, but then calling it choice. At that point, you would leave the entire system completely dismantled, destroyed, and we can just get rid of all the public schools like that and force everybody into private schools. I mean, this is at its most obvious essence, this is a class war situation. The government is being run by the most radical pro-ruling class party, group of interests, rigging the system against working class people, and then essentially setting it up so that you, as a regular working class person, would have less access to education than a rich person. I mean, imagine that. Capitalism allocating resources towards rich people more than poor people. Oh, my God, I can't believe we would do that. But in that being a complaint that people frequently have, why is the rich getting everything? Because it's capitalism, and the rich dominate capitalism. It's almost as if capital dominates capitalism, and the rich get off from it. Yeah. But basically, what they're going to do is destroy education for the lower classes, so that essentially you'll be left in a kind of state of ignorance where you won't know anything. You won't be able to do anything. You won't be able to move up as you supposedly get to do in capitalism, because anybody can succeed. You just have to work really, really hard, right? In other words, this is a deliberate dumbing down and a creating of ignorance among lower classes, and essentially in order to control them. Not very much different why the Catholic Church didn't want people to be able to read and be able to read the Bible for themselves, but I digress. That's rather a part of a tangent. Another very interesting part of this is that it's going to cause a racial segregation. Now, Arkansas is very, very white, and that is not surprising in any way, shape, or form. But guess what? This will allow people to segregate certain sections of the population, not just on economic status, but it's going to be able to let them do this on racial grounds as well. Guess where all the black kids are going to go to school? Let me guess. The really, really bad school, and many of them even going to be left behind completely. Even though no child was supposed to be left behind when Bush was in office, because that was the motto for the education reform, which left like everybody behind. I mean, this is Arkansas. You know they're going to do that. They're going to start creating segregated schools. This is a private school where we choose who gets to go here, and you know what they mean by we, and what they mean by choose. That's the way this is going to completely end up. In other words, it's another thing to fight. Oh God, I lost the word right now. Affirmative action. Another thing that they feel is unfair, and this will do that because it's a private company. You can't tell people what to do with their private companies because capitalism didn't do nothing, right? And just transfer more of that money to private schools. But another really interesting part about this is the whole we're going to do the don't say gay stuff here in Arkansas like they did in Florida. So basically there would be no sex education before grade 5. You would not be allowed to acknowledge that homosexuals or sexual minorities even exist. You wouldn't be able to acknowledge that transgender people exist. And of course, the biggest thing, the most important thing, is stopping the critical race theory. That thing that's taught in law school and not in elementary school or high school. The thing that isn't actually taught to kids. It's part of a law degree that you would have to go to law school in order to get. They make sure to ban that thing that kids aren't getting anyway, because that's what this is. It's kind of like the conservative version of virtue signaling. We're eliminating this terrible threat that's coming for your kids, even though it doesn't really actually exist. Like how the gays are coming for your kids, etc. Except that they're not. And it's hard to claim that they are when your education system teaches them to not know that gay people even exist. So it's the threat that doesn't exist that's coming for you that we don't acknowledge exists, that you don't even know about because we've blanketed it out. Right. And this whole banning any kind of sex education is really the most hilarious part of this, because on what pretense has that ever worked? I mean, we're talking about these changes being made by a generation who had boys telling girls in high school, if we do it in a swimming pool, you can't get pregnant. And then the girls believing that. I mean, that was actually something boomers told each other to be able to have sex as teenagers. And they believed it. Because they were absolutely, completely fucking uneducated about sexual matters and sexual health and reproduction and sexual education in general. Because that's the kind of thing that ignorance leads to. Which is why people stopped doing that. Well, the people who have a modicum of intelligence stopped doing that. And that's where this whole thing is headed to. We're not going to acknowledge gay people exist. We're not going to teach you about how reproduction works. I mean, actually, the earlier you teach it actually is better, because when you teach them very young, then they don't get all the giddy, silly, laughy stuff because that isn't funny yet. And then when you start teaching them as teenagers, they're more likely to listen, but they're going to be silly about it. Just take one health class in high school and tell me that's taken seriously. I dare you. I dare you to do that. But that's where we are right now. Arkansas is about to be busted down to the level of a campy 50s or 80s. I can't really remember. Is it 50 or 80s? Okay, let's just say like a really campy, terrible Rockwell painting, but with all the negative social side effects that the painting doesn't actually demonstrate to you. That's where it is. And that's exactly where we are right now. This was just signed into law. This kind of backwards ass nonsense. All policies which you can scientifically prove do not work are now the law of the land in Arkansas, because they just had to have another Christian fundamentalist nutbag running things. And of course, this was all brought about from the Republican Party in order to save you from a threat that doesn't exist, for a party that is dying and will be gone in another generation because nobody wants their BS anymore, and for the utter and complete moneyed interests of the wealthy elite who just want to leech tax money, leech off the public's money while refusing to pay taxes themselves and claiming how they're so virtuous because the free market will do everything, except when they're leeching off the government. But that really is just the reality of where we find American capitalism this day.
Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.